Something that struck me when listening to your accounts and coming into your situation from the outside, it's intriguing that your initiatives, these experiments that you're conducting in a certain way, have both an evidentiary and, in the best sense, an evidentiary and a therapeutic aspect. Whether it's the history workshops where you present material. In one sense, it's a critical, excavating effort, but it's also, what strikes me is the presence of affect very much in all your three bodies of work and projects. So this is something that intrigues me because therapy is not such a nice word anymore. It's kind of wrapped up in a whole maze of history of psychoanalysis. So I think it's possible to retrieve it and think about it as a form of dealing with what has been repressed, what has been erased, of potentially healing. So I don't know if you want to respond to that, to these two levels on which, in different ways, you're all working.
So
I don't know if I would necessarily. It's true. The question of which words we use becomes a bit tricky. I don't know. In relation, for example, to the film with Philip and Jasmina, we had the psychoanalytic kind of came up at one point, of psychodrama. The idea that there is, not to double it as that, but that, what does the film do, and what does that form do, and part of that form is, as you're also saying, sort of the enactment of being present in that moment, doing something, performing something, and embodying it and believing it for that sort of period of time, I think does something to one's psychology, one's psychological consciousness, and by extension, this sort of idea of role-play acting. It's interesting you mentioned the affect, because I think that to us, maybe it's a bit kind of clear as it came up. We kept kind of oscillating between the use of the word feelings versus emotions, and we sort of settled on emotions. But I'm not precisely sure I can really put my sort of finger on what drives this sort of highly emotive and affective practice, which also deals a lot with performance of an institution, of a situation, of a particular politically present and political history and so on. But I think I'm also kind of curious to know, also to be in the room, because I felt I was kind of a bit straddled in the chair a lot of the time. You're also welcome to ask questions throughout the discussion, so at any point you should. That was good.
I'll just say very quickly that it wasn't an intentional, it was certainly not an intentional aspect of the history workshops while we were working on them. But there are some details of the history of the 50s and the 60s and even aspects of movements in the 19th century that took place in Upper Egypt and are not covered at all, say, in the archives, that were very emotional. And so when people were putting them together, and because we were literally on an island in Upper Egypt that was not very inhabited, and because we spent long periods of time reflecting on moments of social and political change, it became very emotional. And we made it a point not to talk about the present because there's too much of that's confrontational, and we came from different political perspectives. At the end of the day, and this is particularly clear in the piece that I was reading, and Mustafa Mohamed's piece, and this is what Hassan Egeriti, the director that was doing the training on performance and storytelling, said that ultimately everybody, no matter whose story you're telling, ultimately you're telling your own. So even when they do sit and write about the Nubian experience of being moved during the building of the High Dam, or someone who was part of the resistance in Inna in Upper Egypt in the 19th century, a fisherman, for example, inside of that is the contradictory emotions and the contradictory consciousness and the contradictory experiences of someone that is part of something and not, and everything that we go through. Because also what we unearthed are all of these contradictions that will never make it into a story being told straight, which is the way mainstream history or nationalist histories are told. Fayaz, it was very present.
Thank you. I have two questions. One is to Alia and Mossallam. I was very, very impressed with the idea that songs that survive as folklore could be traced to be political. I find it very interesting because the question would be, how is it that they were aestheticized? How is it that they didn't have that content? I only know one case that Roy Faris Thompson once wrote about, which is the way mambo, the Cuban, American, Mexican mambo, encodes songs from a religious character, of African character. So you had Yoruba hymns turned into popular music. Yeah. But I wonder if you can advance a little bit about that, because for me it is very opposed to my local kind of tradition that has to do with the fact that those stories remain attached to the corridos. That would be something that, like a revolutionary song in the 20th century. And there's a completely different thing I was hoping to say to Jasmina and I have to do. When I saw the film twice, I mean, in Venice and here, and I need to confess that I was uncomfortable. And it has to do, now I understand, with something that I would describe as the aesthetic of the workshop. I feel that you have a number of very important interventions. There were people that were putting their emotional, personal energy into the process. They were acting and enacting. You had a very important story, a very significant issue. But somehow I feel, maybe this is not shared by everybody, but that the emphasis in keeping the process present, rather than turning it into a film, editing it, making it somehow different, is something that becomes contradictory. And I feel that is you. I mean, in a certain way, the keeping the process has to do with the documentary aesthetic of many contemporary practices. So, I mean, it's a little bit of a provocation that involves me feeling that keeping the process in the film disrupts the political, even political possibilities of the film. It has to do with the avant-garde-ish aesthetic of that, but also with my feeling that I finally understood when you were talking that is the problem, that there's the workshop to it somehow, that there's no difference between the method of the production and the presentation. But maybe you can react about that. Thank you.
I mean, I think there's a few things going on. First of all, this is a very low budget film. Okay, that's the first thing. So if you want to fund our next film, there might be a possibility for a different aesthetic. But I think the more important aspect for us is this was improvised. And I don't know if you've worked with actors or watched that process a little bit. If we would have had the crew there with the possibilities to really capture this in such a way to turn it into a kind of more conventional fiction film, you would have lost the visceral, their agency. I mean, it would have turned into a scripted film. It completely transforms the project. I appreciate your uncomfortableness, but it would have simply changed the project. You know, it's not about keeping. There's nothing avant-garde-ish to it. We're trying to kind of show the process for the sake of showing the process. That is the film. I mean, it is about the fact that this is improvised. It is about the fact that most of these scenes, they had one take. And if we messed up in the filming, we messed up in the filming. If we tried it a second time, it lost its life. Because the scene is being written as it's acted. You know, we didn't tell the actors the day before what was going to happen the next day. Because we purposefully did not want them to go home and think about, tomorrow I'm going to be the person in the position of protest, or I'm going to be the boss, and this is how I'm going to react, or taking the time to remember how they have lived that experience, or how they've seen someone react to that experience. We wanted them to live that. I mean, this is a little bit what we're talking about with this use of the word enactment, because it is live. It is happening as we film, and so there isn't really the possibility to go with a more classical aesthetic. Does that answer your question, or is
Jay
it?
has a question.
I just want to add something quickly, because I understand what Timok's comment and what he means. I think also in a way that there is, again, to go back to affects, that there was something going on, that it was also very difficult for you to let go of original intentions, let's say, of something you wanted to arrive somewhere. And I don't think it has anything to do with budget, to be honest. I think you could have also just worked with subtitles or something like that. Does not require money or anything. But it was very hard to, on the one hand, maintain your original intentions, going through this process of translating facts and personal stories into a scripted something else. But at the same time, you could also not let go of it. Maybe could you think about how you would do it now that you arrived after, in the making of the film, at this notion of enactment, if you would do it differently?
I wouldn't do it differently.
I just think maybe Kodamok's question, if I got it correctly, was not with deep appreciation for the entire process. From what I understood, I think he meant the moments that you reveal that they are in the workshop. It's not to take away from the workshop process or to have different production values. What I understood is the points where they're painting the set or discussing the diagram of the space, or the moments, the 2 moments where the two of you are revealed as happen to be there. I think it's these 3 or 4 moments which, if they were...
The first scene on the roof.
The first scene on the roof is still okay, because it kind of leads you in. But these 4 or 5 moments of actually painting the set, if those were removed, and the process is the same, the film is almost the same, but just those 4 scenes, maybe.
We'll just go back to the question that Alia to answer.
Very quickly on the songs. In this case in particular, we found a number of songs. There's a composer from this period called Said Darwish, whose political songs we still sing until now in protests. In protests, but in general. I mean, they're even more prevalent, I think, in our consciousness than songs that are sung in the present, political songs that are sung in the present. But this one, Yaziz Aini, we had a musical researcher with us, Mustafa Said, and he could tell that this recording was from around 1915. But this was a diva, Naima Masriya, at the time. But we couldn't tell if the song started with the farmers being conscripted first or from her first. But in other instances, and there's another song called Zurumi, and it says, basically sings, visit me at least once a year and don't forget about me. It's also rendered to folklore, and it's been sung by Fairuz, if you know the Lebanese singer. And she sings it as if, I mean, the way we understand it is, visit me when I'm dead, you know, and don't forget about me. So we found out that it was also sung during this period by prisoners. So people don't forget about what they've sacrificed and the fact that they're in prison. In my experience in looking at songs in the 50s, for example, I found out that a lot of the chants that we use in protests come from songs in the 50s. And usually people who wrote those songs don't want to break them down and tell you what the context behind them is. But there's something about that moment when the song was sung, whether it's the anger or the sadness, that somehow carries through. And the lyrics of these songs that were sung in Suez in 1967 or 8, during the long impasse between 67 and the war in 73, still continue, not as songs, but as fragments, whether it's the music, the structure of the song itself, or the lyrics, which have become slogans. Sometimes it's easier to trace when you're talking about the 50s and 60s, but in this period, we couldn't. I mean, had I not found the lyrics, I don't think we would have been able to access that they were sung on the train, for example.
Hello? Yeah. I was just going to refer to the question that was being discussed before. Yeah, because I feel like this function that you were also mentioning of this therapy or healing aspect in this reenacting, for me is like very important. And so I'm also like trying to right now like dissect these different functions, because maybe that's what made you feel uncomfortable. The question of then documenting it, and what you were also saying earlier, to find a way how to make these things visible and like create a kind of documentation or archive, or how to process and deal with these things that are happening and not being visible, not being shown and talked about. So I feel like maybe you could talk a little bit more about how you, like what your relationship also was or is with the workers, or what your function as filmmakers in this situation is or would be. And then for me it really becomes evident to ask the question, okay, so where and why is it being shown? Because of course, if you show it at the Venice Biennale or like in specific context, like I think that's a very crucial moment somehow. I can't really put my finger down on it, but I think maybe that's referring to this kind of, yeah, what you were getting at. I don't know if I got it wrong.
We'll take one more question.
So yeah, this is and following on from that, to figure out, you know, to get back also to the whole, these notions that we're talking about around public spheres and public spaces, and because, you know, I've worked with Augusta Bowles methodologies, and it is largely effective, and it is meant to be within, it's quite an intimate process, but it's socially driven, and it's kind of quite material, you know, you reach material ends, and then to develop the form of it, and then I would just wanted, you know, about it's sitting on a threshold of a new aesthetic, of an aesthetic of that, or is it because when you watch it as a form, when you sit as opposed to an installation, there is an expectation of a narrative, so you defy that. So it's, you know, frustration, and that is also quite powerful to frustrate that expectation of narrative. But at the same time, it makes the notion of political agency banal and improvised. It's like these political agents are making it up as they go along. So there are quite a few things going on there. I just wasn't quite sure what you were after, and I think that the axis between it being affective and part of the whole enterprise, which is about finding material solutions, but when it goes out into a public sphere, what is that?
I can only try answer these questions. I also don't know exactly how to answer them. It's still something that we're discovering with the film as it is being screened in front of different audiences. So your reaction here is very different from the kind of reaction that we had in Cairo. The film hasn't been premiered yet. We're working on the. We did some papers from the censor, which is tricky. But I think that there's something about turning that material into this particular cut. That is also, like you said, it's very much about our choices, and our decisions, and choice of this aesthetic. Also going to you, it's also the choice of the aesthetic of filming the floor, filming this whole bit. So there is the problem with like letting go of something, for sure, but there's also an attempt to find, looking for different ways of expression, also new ways for us, right? Because, like Philip said, we don't come from that theatrical background. And although I liked a lot, I read a lot of novels with Metwaly and Stanislavski, Rudowski, and Brecht, and there's a lot of very interesting texts out there. When you start working with people yourself, without previously also preconceived notions of what that would be like, it becomes very experimental. So go back to the question of, so what is it that you want to do with that film? And I think what we do very much, what we're trying to do very much is to have it in Egypt and attempt to, the idea is to make something that people are going to enjoy. And people in Egypt, the ones that we screen to, are really enjoying it because it is fictive like that and uncomfortable like this. And there's a lot of issues which are also quite, in a sense, to my understanding, they're also quite westernized. This idea that this is not right. You shouldn't be doing things this way. You should keep certain things that way. That's not politically correct. And so there is a risk that we're taking with this approach, and we are pushing these boundaries. And perhaps they're failing for some of the audiences, and that's okay. We'll see what happens further in Cairo. We're planning on screening it as much as possible in different setups and scenarios, not necessarily in cinemas. The Venice Biennale, there's a lot behind that event and behind the way it was presented and things that didn't happen and issues that occurred that we weren't aware of, not really having the experience of participating in an event like that. There's a lot of politics behind, which took over, or can take over, which is a shame of the creative process and of the work itself. So I don't really have an answer, but I can only say that we are attempting on touching upon all these things that you just described, and I'm actually glad that there's this kind of response. Like there's also a feeling that there's something uncomfortable about that, and I don't mean it in that radical sense. Oh, it's uncomfortable. That's no, that's not what I mean. But anyway, to finish.
I think we take maybe like 2 more questions and then Randy will kind of escort us into the general discussion.
So Mitch, maybe, and then I have a specific question for Alia.
Again, don't mean to badger you guys with questions, but I was curious about the transitions in your practice from Intifada to Mossallam to where you're at now. And I was mostly curious because, and this could be entirely because you're misquoted or because I have not read between the lines, but in one interview that I came across online, it said that you said that there is only so much you can do with online screenings and screenings in squares, which is why you somehow transitioned to where you are at now. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that, as to what you mean by there's only so much you can do with screenings at Tahrir Cinema or online, as opposed to sort of having it in more sort of in exhibition spaces.
Mine would be a comment more so. I saw the movie, I found it long, but it was extremely interesting for me in the sense of the manner in which, if you were to go and interview, I would believe, if you were to go and interview the actors who are ex-workers in this manufactory, they would claim a certain authorship to this movie too, in the sense that they would not leave the authorship only to filmmakers. And it's important in the sense of how they express and narrate their stories, because these voices go blunt, they do not remain you know, they don't remain forceful on an Al Jazeera documentary. They aren't even the subject of these documentaries because these factories are too small in the scale of things that are happening post the revolution in Egypt. But in the sense of our city of Bombay, where we've seen a very similar spate of privatization, which has been put through in the last 2 decades. And if any person who's been affected, and about 3 million people here who have been directly affected by privatization, by kind of selling of mill lands, of cotton mills that we've had in the city, they would somewhere recognize their own voices within this film. And I think so that kind of, there's a kind of political urgency and a kind of political, it takes on a kind of political space within that, there. Because if it had been entirely enacted out like, like a movie, as we might say, we wouldn't have not like, I really liked it when there was a young boy who was totally not taking the orders of the sergeant seriously. I found that really intimate somewhere within the movie. And those are things that suddenly change the experience of cinema for me as one of the audience, where I'm not theorizing as a film critic or someone who might want to go behind the connotations of its production, etc. Because the idea of protest, we've talked a lot about protest. Not far from here, like 500 meters from here, you have the Martyrs Square. It's like Fatma Chowk is just about 500 meters from here. 62 people lost their lives, who weren't a part of the present fascist regime that rules the city, and they've been forgotten. And that had its origins in the communist movement in the city, which has been eradicated. And the party that eradicated the movement actually now claims of creating this state of Maharashtra, and they have almost no role to play within this entire movement. And 2 days ago, to commemorate the martyr who died for fighting for the workers, they did not allow a protest to happen at this square because they don't have any political power. So I think this kind of histories, I think this movie has some kind of urgency in the space because it keeps those voices, which then she talks of becoming folklores and remaining within.
Can you have a mic?
Hello. The quote that you're referring to is actually, this is something that we said in Mossallam often, but I think you're remembering it the wrong way around. What we're referring to is that we are trying to get our videos out of the online space because it's easy to make a video and to put it online and leave it at that. But in Egypt, you only have somewhere between 15 and 20% of the population, primarily in urban spaces, who even have access to the internet, let alone will watch our channel. So what we were talking about was the importance of having something like Tahrir Cinema, where we could show these videos on the street, which is a completely different audience than you do when they remain on a YouTube channel. If we still had access to that space, that's where we would be screening films.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right now, if we even get close to that square, you're under threat of being arrested. I try to avoid downtown completely, the whole area. I don't know how much of that was a question, how much was a comment, but maybe just to explain a little bit about our process as well, that Jasmina and I spent the better part of 3 years basically running after these kinds of very similar protests, filming, making quick videos, quick edits, putting them online. Occasionally they'd be picked up, like TV stations in Egypt will just download your videos and screen them and cut them right at the point where it mentions who you are. And there's something that got quite tiring in that process, definitely, but we also started questioning what that does. To begin with, there's very little interest. People do not want to hear anything about workers in Egypt. I mean, we were in Sarajevo a couple of years ago, and I was quite surprised about that. When worker actions happen, there's actually a lot of solidarity around the workspace. That's not the case in Egypt. Nobody wants to hear anything about workers. When I went to this one industrial town where a lot of protests have happened, Mossallam, I would ask workers about some of the protests that happened, and they would change the definitions of words because they do not want to be identified with those kinds of protest, moments of protest, because they've been so demonized in the media. And yeah, so this is a bit of what we're responding to, with changing the approach to those kinds of
Yes, actually. Alia, I have a question for you, actually, which has to do again with the history workshops. At least partly because I tend to be anxious about revisionism as a way of revisiting history, excavating what has been erased or deleted. But it's a complex, double-edged process, as we all know. Because there's one way of doing it where you expand your sense of what happened in history, what accounts you've received, how they can be engaged with critically, how other kinds of perspectives and evidence can be brought in, which allows you to have a far more versional sense of history, where there are rival accounts and competition in some way. But another way of doing it, which is unfortunately how it's done more often, is where one magisterial master narrative is simply negated and replaced with another. So it's almost as if one foundational myth gets replaced by that. So to ground that in your practice, I just want to draw you out on some of the, how does this actually work? There's a couple of things that I noticed when you were speaking. And you're obviously working in places which have, for many decades, been the stronghold of the Muslim Brotherhood, or the Delta Valley. This is.
It's not my criteria, but maybe.
Okay. Because at one point I was very intrigued when you said we have different political perspectives, but so we stayed off that and spoke about songs. But I'm just wondering, following say Jan and Aleda's work, how is collective memory created? How is it stabilized? How do people's political convictions affect? How does that affect their choice of cultural material? There may be songs, there may be stories, what sort of context they bear relevance to, how they're remembered, how their relevance is remembered. I can't believe that the political convictions of some of the people you're talking to can be separated from their choice of cultural material, for one thing. Also, related to this, sorry, I'm piling on these questions, but it makes me also think about a certain primal scene in classical anthropology, which is the encounter with the native informant. Of course, through the medium of the workshop, you're softening that blow. It's much more people participating and you're collaborating with them to draw out alternative histories. But, whether you like it or not, there is one way of construing the scene where these people are native informants. And I've always been troubled by the idea of the veracity of the native informant. This discipline rests, or has classically rested, on the veracity of the native informant. But we all know that native informants have their own reasons for accounting for their lives in a certain way. So, do you want to address these questions?
Yeah, I'll try. From the middle, when you were talking about how collective memory is created and stabilized, I don't think it's ever stabilized. I think it's very shifting, especially when it comes to songs. And when it comes to songs of popular culture, they're performed. When I find a song I'm very excited about, while I'm researching, for instance, if I go back to record it, I never hear it the same way. And this used to frustrate me in the beginning when I was doing my PhD, then I learned that it was something to do with the way songs are. But collective memory is constantly shifting and things transform. Like the songs we were talking about, it's a song about one thing and ends up, we think it means something else. In terms of revisionism and what sort of narratives we revisit, the way we try to do it is that we try to get as much material as possible, so that we engage with several different narratives about the same event. And when I say we, I mean we put out a call for the workshop. The workshop was in Upper Egypt, so priority was for Upper Egyptian applicants. And so we had 20 participants, 15 of whom were from different villages and cities in Upper Egypt, and 5 were from the Delta and Cairo. So they're not necessarily from the area. Yes, we did meet with Nubians who were sort of moved during the building of the high dam, but I had some connections there because of when I did my PhD. My criteria for choosing the places where I work is a sense of gratitude that I have for people who've helped me, who were my informants when I was doing my PhD, and my frustration with the fact that it comes out in a written format that is not accessible to people who were excited about finally having their own versions of the story in written. I go back to these areas so that we research collectively as a workshop, and then we think of the mode of retelling these events. And the reason why we resort to forms of fiction or art, such as storytelling and film, is that it gives space for more pluralism, for more, that's why I was saying contradictory narratives. I mean, not only multiple narratives, but also contradictory ones. And it also gives us a chance to throw it back into the community, rather than this idea that we go in, we collect information, and we publish it somewhere else. And this workshop is part of my sort of experimenting with how to reverse that idea of knowledge production, or to reverse that idea of accessibility. So my criteria for now has been the 3 areas where my research was based, which is basically Suez and the Canal area and Upper Egypt. I think that was mainly it, right? And why do people choose, I mean, people's choice of cultural material? I mean, I think it has to do with history. I mean, in Pursaid, for example, they have 2 forms of singing. One is called the Dhamma, and the songs are more Sufi-like. And this doesn't come from Pursaid, it comes from the Delta, but it came to Pursaid during the digging of the Suez Canal. And the other form of dance is singing or cultural production is a dance called the Bambuteya, which is a dance by fishermen. And so the songs they sing now are a combination of the fishermen's dances with stuff that came in during the digging of the canal. In Upper Egypt, it's more madih, it's the singing that has to do with, it's more religious singing. So there are, I mean, I think it has to do more with history, but there always are ways that people decide to remember, and I think forms of cultural production are oral, and they carry something. I mean, you learn the song and you re-sing it, even if you don't remember the context, it carries something very heavy with it. Do we have any more questions?
What?
It's time for the closing.
Okay.
Yeah. Transitioning into the closing session.
Closing session.